Between the 14th and 17th centuries, a window of history we call the Renaissance saw the most prodigious output of accomplishment, of foundational discovery or rediscovery, the likes of which the world has never seen since. And nothing escaped its touch, from understanding beauty, painting, sculpture, architecture, setting the scientific method, bringing about modern reason, understanding our place in the universe better than ever before. All this came from that one period. But have you ever asked the question, what was it about their way of thinking that enabled them to achieve these wonders, to actually make these massive breakthroughs? Well, in this video, we're going to take a look at 10 books written during the Renaissance, which any one of us can individually read, and by reading them all, begin to get an idea of the kind of mind it took to be a Renaissance person, the kind of mental disposition that gave birth to the ability to see the world truthfully and accurately, and then to mould it as we wanted. So, having said that, let's start our list. What must be said about this list at the beginning is that it is not a list of the best works of the Renaissance. For instance, Copernicus' works on the revolution of the spheres is not in this list. It is arguably more powerful and important than some of the other works in this list. However, the list is not for an individual idea. It's to help us understand the way people were thinking, the operating system of the Renaissance, as it were, which means irrespective of the field we're looking at of study, it's the way of approaching that we're interested in. So, having said that, let's go to our first book in the list, and I'll just grab my e-reader. Now, the first book, which I've got on an e-reader, because not all of these are easy to get in physical format, is Petrarch's Secretum. Now, no one can say an era starts on this date, but if you're going to get close in terms of works, Petrarch is one of the characters you would say it's around here the Renaissance begins to start. Petrarch wrote many things, especially poetry, but amongst his works is something called the Secretum, or the Secret, and it's actually not written for publication, it was written for himself. But it is a fascinating read. In it, he has a discussion, a dialogue, following sort of the old Greek and Latin practices in philosophy of having a dialogue with somebody. He has a dialogue with St. Augustine. Now, Augustine is renowned for being intelligent, amongst the most intelligent of the Church Fathers, of being honest and frank. And Petrarch wants to have himself examined through by Augustine, but overseeing this conversation is also truth herself. And that's a really important thing to remember. This book is actually his private musings, his discussing through of his own internal feelings, desires, wants, ambitions, obligations which he thinks he should want more but maybe doesn't, say for instance religion. But because it's being monitored by truth and talking, and he's imagining how would St. Augustine respond to me, we're getting a very honest exploration of the interior individual. And he talks about so many different topics, including being aware of how finite time is, of avarice and ambition, and particularly his over-interest in a woman called Laura. Excuse the break, I'm struggling with a cough at the moment. The point of this book is we begin to see, at a period that's coming out of the scholastic medieval age, where everything is about God's will and how everything is part of the divine will unfolding, and that human life is just wasteful and we're just waiting to, we should be paying attention to the purity of the soul and the spirit and going to heaven. Petrarch starts to show a deep interest in what it is just to be human. This element of fascination of just looking within, being able to put words and thoughts to how we see things, how we think upon things, to be really self-conscious in our thoughts, which is something, even today, most of us, we'd have to say, are not that great at. So there's number one, Petrarch's Secretum. Number two on the list is Pico della Mirandola's On the Dignity of Man. Mirandola is a very young man when he writes this. I think he's in his early 20s. And it's actually a letter to someone asking them to support him in being able to go and meet with the priests and the debaters in Rome to talk about various philosophical issues. And he points out that they've so far told him, no, you're too young to know anything about philosophy. And he has hundreds of ideas he wants to talk through. But what is fascinating about Mirandola's work regarding the Renaissance mindset is the emphasis it places on humankind's innate brilliance if it's used well, if we work with it. He talks about, let us be filled with this holy ambition, not to be satisfied with mediocrity, but to reach for the highest. He says how God made man a chameleon, as in he didn't just program him like other animals to just do certain things at given times of the year with a fixed nature, but rather he could make of himself whatever he turned his mind to, and specifically that all endeavour of mind is actually to improve the person. He makes so many interesting comments, particularly early on in his letter, when he argues about those who are the scholars of the day and how they say that not everyone should be looking at philosophy and learning. And he argues that as if it were absolutely nothing to have the causes of things, the ways of nature, the reason of the universe, the counsels of God, the mysteries of heaven and earth, very certain before our eyes and hands, unless someone could derive some benefit for it, but for acquiring profit. He actually criticizes the scholars of the day. They only do learning in order to be paid. But he wants to learn because he knows that the learned human is the human that begins to reach for the heavens. He argues that we can either, by our conduct and our thinking, become beasts, giving in to scratching every sensual itch we have, or we can elevate ourselves to the level of angels by using our thought and the body we've been given. This book is quite a masterpiece and important for the Renaissance way of thinking. It causes us to look at ourselves in wonder. Do we truly recognize just what we are capable of as a human being, what our minds can do, and what we can then do with nature once we understand it? On the Dignity of Man by Mirandola. Third on our list, and back to my e-reader, is Lorenzo Valla and his work on the donation of Constantine. I don't know if you've heard of this. This work is a masterpiece in reasoning and philology, that is the study of words in history especially. This is a remarkable piece of independent thinking, of excellent reasoning and a determination to find the truth of a matter. The Donation of Constantine was a historical work which the church used to ground their authority over Europe's temporal princes, the kings and the nations. It argued that when Constantine moved in the 5th century from Rome over to Byzantium, he gave the church, the papal church, the right to rule the rest of Europe. And based on that, they had wielded authority for all this time. Valla began to question that. And his work on the Donation of Constantine begins to pick apart problems with the actual document itself, demonstrating that it couldn't have been written at the time it was said to have been written, but much later. And if it was written later, then Constantine was dead. And if Constantine was dead, he certainly didn't write this and give the church power over the princes of Europe. This actually strikes at the very core of the biggest institution of the day. And of course, this is part of the Renaissance, this ability not just to take authority as the measure of truth, but to find truth itself, and this devoted quest to demonstrating reasonably and logically the truth of a matter. One of the words that he picks up on, for instance, is the word satrap, which is in this letter, this article by Constantine. However, it's very unlikely Constantine would ever have known or used the word satrap. So why would it be in the document? This is a case study in philology. Now, you may think, I'm not interested in philology. Remember, that's not the purpose of this list. The purpose of this list is to give us broad areas we can look into to see the thinking, the approach that a Renaissance mind had. Because they shared a given set of ideas which produced the most productive period of Western history. So there's the third one, on the donation of Constantine by Lorenzo Valla. Fourth on our list is the brilliant, entertaining, funny work Praise of Folly by Erasmus. So we're looking towards the end of the Renaissance period. But this is a masterpiece and very revealing of the Renaissance mind at work. In this book, Erasmus gets the god Folly to give a sermon at a church praising himself and those who are related to him. The purpose of this book is it's somewhat anti-academic. Erasmus is pointing out that as much as people want to be learned and scholars, and there are institutions and academies, lots of what we do in life, if you want to see life whole and see it true, which seems to be very much at the core of the Renaissance ideal, is that we are very foolish a lot of the time. We as humans are arbitrary. That even when we try to be completely rational, if you don't factor in folly and things which are not, rational, you can't actually describe the world accurately at all. And so Folly begins to show how he is responsible for all of the great things in life by pulling apart the most enjoyable aspects of life and showing how they're follisome. For instance, marriage. He says if anyone were to go and think about what marriage entails after you've committed to one another, then it would be the height of foolishness to actually go into that kind of contract with somebody. And yet, if you were to think about it, what is life without love, without being bound to someone? He talks about it with friendship as well. Friends, they bring up so much distress that in a completely logical, ordered system, you may conclude, actually, it's better not to have friends. But of course, friendship makes life worth living. And so, what Erasmus does here is he shines a light on the over-seriousness of things, of the trying to completely nail down everything completely to make a perfect system, because the world is full of wonder and oddness. Just listen to what Folly has to say about Stoic philosophers, particularly Seneca here. Seneca, that double-dyed Stoic, loudly contradicts this. He won't allow the philosopher any emotion at all. But in taking away emotion, what Seneca leaves behind is not even a human being. Rather, he's taken it upon him to create a new deity such as has never existed anywhere, nor ever will. No, I'll be even blunter. He's forming an effigy of a human being out of marble, something that's insensible and lacking in any human feeling at all. Very well. If that's what the Stoics want, they can enjoy their philosopher's company. They can fall in love with him. They won't have a rival. And it goes like this through the whole book. The uselessness of intellectuals. Warfare. His comments on warfare are absolutely brilliant. In just one paragraph, he destroys the idea of why anyone should fight for their country. Fifth on our list is a bit harder to come by, to be quite honest, and for that reason I was going to leave it off the list. However, it's such a great book if you can get hold of it, and it's Vita by Leon Battista Alberti. You'll see other works by Alberti. He was an absolute genius. On Painting would be one which you could easily put in place. But the one I was more interested in was vita, or my life. Alberti is almost the epitome of the Renaissance man. So learned, a polymath. And he writes down on painting to teach people in the Renaissance how to draw. In his work, he talks about mastering, or he lays out how to master lineal geometry in painting. He believes in the truth of proportion and looking for universal mathematical laws that describe how things actually are, and then using those to create beauty and bring things to fruition. But his work Vita, he writes it in the third person, so he talks about himself by his own name, almost trying to disguise that he's the writer of it. And it will give you an insight into the behaviours and interests of the Renaissance mind, a complete zest for life, an infinite, boundless curiosity for any subject. He talks about his work on architecture. He actually writes the 10 books of architecture. He talks about developing the body, looking after the body physically so that you can leapfrog a standing person so that you're that energetic. Understanding mathematics, understanding drawing, understanding how to see, sapere vedere. All these things, he is the epitome of the Renaissance man. And it was so interesting that it's got me, myself personally, going down a rabbit hole of studying Alberti's life. And maybe, depending on how far I study it, I'll come back and do a video on him as the quintessential uomo universalis, the Renaissance man. But if you can get hold of it, Vita by Leon Battista Alberti. If not, read his work on painting. And again, even if painting's not what you're interested in, you're reading it to listen to the mind of a Renaissance thinker approaching a topic that they're interested in. Notice there's zeal for getting things right, for understanding the very foundation, not just what to do, but why it works. The quest for truth is all in there. Now, speaking of artists, the next book on our list is Giorgio Vasari's Lives of the Artists, and this is just volume 1 here. My days, is this wonderful to read. You might think, well, why would you want to read a biography of artists to learn about Renaissance thinking? Again, it's because of the approach, the way people were thinking back then, the way they went looking at the world. This isn't just any old kind of collection of biographies by Vasari. Vasari has got a very specific intent. In his preface, he lays out the most fascinating potted history of the art of ancient Rome, its literature and its art history, and the ancient Greeks, in fact. And he says, as you see a decline of Rome when it's invaded by its neighbours, the Goths and the Visigoths and the Vandals, etc., he says you actually can trace a decline in artistic ability. He talks about after the Caesar Antoninus, when everything breaks up and the church holds sway overall and medieval scholasticism kicks in and everything is seen just through a religious lens and through a lens of Aristotelian logic, people lost their understanding of the arts. They could see a sculpting or a statue, but they couldn't replicate it because that knowledge had been lost. Vasari said, we have recovered a lot of that because the Renaissance was a rediscovering of the past. And they had learned from the old artists. And we've now got back up to a high level of art. And he said, I am writing this down because maybe in the future another dark age will come in when people will have forgotten beauty and forgotten what the masters once knew. And he said, and I hope maybe if this book survives, it could give instruction to those ones. The love of knowledge, the love and the importance of learning from the past. The past is not history you just read, it is something to replicate. This is another little gem that comes out from here, from one book, a way of thinking of the author that you just get a sense of. He's also adding to the discovery of how to craft history as we know it today, but also the purpose of imitatio, that is to imitate the greats. not just always find our own way, but to look for the objective beauties and objective rules and laws that they found which work and build upon those. An example of this, if you don't mind me reading it, it's just the opening to his chapter on Filippo Brunelleschi, the artist from Florentine. And he just says this: "There are many men whom nature has made small and insignificant, but who are so freely consumed by emotion and ambition that they know no peace unless they are grappling with difficult or indeed almost impossible tasks and achieving astonishing results. These men enhance and distinguish whatever they happen to take up, no matter how commonplace or worthless it may seem. So one must never look down one's nose at those who lack the fine grace and bearing with which nature should endow all artists when they come into the world. Lumps of earth often conceal veins of gold." Next on our list is probably the most famous of the works on our list, and it is The Prince by Machiavelli. Now, I debated whether to put this on the list because I didn't just want to pick what was popular, but the truth is, when you read The Prince by Machiavelli, it is a case study in the way the Renaissance mind approaches things. I'm not trying to say there is one particular mind in the Renaissance. However, there are certain ground principles which you will find with all of them. When reading Machiavelli's The Prince, ask yourself the question, what is he trying to do here? What is his most earnest intent or point of observation? Yes, he's trying to give advice on how a prince may rule effectively. But he's not just making a treatise, he's trying to observe human beings accurately. The reason we say Machiavellian, it looks so cold and calculated, is because he's stripping out the should of anything. A prince should rule like this and people should respond like that. And wouldn't it be ideal if this? He's just saying, he's very good. This is the truth of how humans behave. Excuse me, just had a coughing fit. This is the truth of how humans behave. This is their psychology, for want of a better word. And this is how they have behaved in history. This is how certain rulers have been effective. And here are the principles beneath, when I've thought about them and studied them, as to why they've been effective rulers and why humans respond to this way of being dealt with. It's brutally effective. It's looking again for the underlying rules, the laws. And you'll find this through what I found looking at all of these, was that they all look for a law. Now, a law may be clear when it comes to something like geometry or science, but human nature seems to be bound by laws, something we don't often think about today. People resist it. But back then it was taken as a given. And so is there some pattern that constantly repeats which reveals some law behind behaviour? And lo and behold, Machiavelli is cottoning onto some of that. But that's not all of it. Look for the way he's thinking. Look for how he decides to interact with historical accounts. Are they just history and interesting, or are there lessons to extract, like Vasari extracts from the lives of the painters? Our next book, in some respects, is the truest reflection of the mind of a Renaissance thinker, because it is Leonardo da Vinci's notebooks. When he writes his notebooks, this isn't because he's formulating an accurate treatise of something, writing a book in order to be published. This is his notes to himself. And so we get an intimate look at the thinking, the individual private thinking of maybe the greatest mind of the Renaissance, so at least certainly up there with them, Leonardo da Vinci. And there's a haphazardness to the way the notebooks are laid out. Sometimes you can get the ones full of thousands of sketches. This one doesn't have it because that would be rather large to hold all of them. But you also get his musings, you get him writing questions down to himself, or just simple observations about a place that he's been, like standing on a mountain and This mountain is particularly interesting because you can see 4 rivers starting from it, going out through Europe in different directions. And then he leaves his comment there. But it reveals that he's ever alert to the world, ever curious to the world. But I want to read you one thing that he says right at the beginning, because I don't know if you know this, Leonardo da Vinci was not an educated man, as in he didn't go to university. And this is what he says, and is revealing again of the mindset that achieves prodigious output. I am fully aware that the fact of my not being a man of letters may cause certain presumptuous persons to think that they may with reason blame me, alleging that I am not a man with learning. Foolish folk! Do they not know that I might retort by saying, as did Marius to the Roman patricians, they who adorn themselves in the labours of others will not permit me my own? They will say that because I have no book learning, I cannot properly express what I desire to treat of. But they do not know that my subjects require for their exposition experience rather than the words of others. Experience has been the mistress of whoever has written well, and so as mistress I will cite her in all cases. He goes on quite a bit with a chip on his shoulder against the scholars of Florence and other cities, who because of their credentials feel they can look down on Da Vinci. But look at what Da Vinci accomplishes compared to them. And that disposition, he was very much of this sapere vedere idea, knowing how to see. with his eye and a pencil, sketching a straight rule and a compass for geometry, he accomplished so much that those scholars would never have done. This idea that truth is not from authority, it is from evidence. There's a moving of the loci of truth itself in the Renaissance thinker. So, fascinating read. By the way, at the end, in his notebooks, you've got fables that he has. Very small fables, like the lily set itself by the shores of the Ticino, and the current carried away the riverbank, and the lily with it. You know, why has he written that? It's because proud things may think they're stable, but actually can be taken away. These little thoughts are the mark of the polymath, which comes from the Renaissance. The ability to see patterns and truths or ideas or principles in different places. It's not monomathy that we have today, monomath, focusing on one, but polymath. Finding the repeating patterns from all around will give you a deeper insight into life. And it's just a fascinating read. 9th on our list is an extraordinary work. And if you're someone who loves science and appreciates the scientific method or wants to understand the scientific method, this is a book you should read anyway, let alone for it revealing a way of thinking. And it is Bacon's Novum Organum. And so it's a new method. And instead of relying heavily on pure syllogism and the logic of Aristotle and the ancient Greeks, we're going into empiricism, using hard evidence to make your case for things. This Novum Organum is the birth of the scientific method written down. But it's such a refreshing read. It comes in very small little axioms all the way through. And Bacon makes an observation on the things that get in the way of our thinking, the things that obscure truth and knowledge from us. And again, notice that this driving explicitly for hard truth, for the underlying cause for things. It also helps break away from authority being truth, but actually evidence and good reason based on evidence. I want to mention that point because the other work I could have put here would have been Giordano Bruno's On the Infinite, the Universe and Other Worlds. That challenged the church scholars. It wasn't so much as is often framed the Bible versus science. It was the medieval scholasticism of Aristotle and Aristotle's framework being forced over everything that Bruno was really pushing against. And it shows again this idea of where is the loci of truth. Truth should be with what one can observe, and then what one can either demonstrate or infer reasonably from what one observes. But Novum Organum by Bacon is actually delightful to read. And if you like people like La Rochefoucauld or Balthasar Gracian, where it comes in the form of maxims or axioms, then you'll like Bacon's work as well. But I tell you, you don't just read it straight through. Every point you can stop. Parts of it, one of the things I really enjoyed, and is famous actually, is the idols of the mind. These idols we pay homage to, these ideas we keep and fix in our mind that actually distort our ability to see correctly. They're like cognitive biases, I suppose. And he talks about the idols of the tribe, the idols of the cave, the idols of the marketplace, and the idols of the theatre. And that in itself is just a fascinating little section in a wonderful piece of work. But again, I'm not advocating you read it for any particular reason in this video, other than look at the way the mind is working. How is Bacon going about his topic? Can you sense just the way he looks at the world outside? And that's the purpose of this list. If you were to read half of this list, it would be good. If you read all 10, you begin to be affected, especially if you do them all back to back, and that is a little tiresome. You begin to be immersed in a way of seeing the world. Even if you can't put your finger and express exactly how, it changes. You become alert to, oh, this wasn't just a random moment where stuff happened in the Renaissance. There was a very specific belief in a core set of ideas which led to the Renaissance discovering so much. So, what is last on our list? So before I give you the 10th work on this list, I want to say stick around just a little bit afterwards, where I'm going to mention 2 works which should be the topic of an upcoming video and why you might be interested in them. Anyway, 10th on this list. And I'm not suggesting you read all of this in one go. By all means, take your time. Michel de Montaigne's The Essays. The Essays, well, in fact, he gives us the word essay. An essay means to test. Montaigne does something quite extraordinary in the Essays. He talks about the I. I am the subject. This is not a subject of the world or something which I'm trying to understand. Rather, this is me. This goes right the way back to Petrarch and to Mirandola, who had this inward-lookingness, which was part of the Renaissance. The fascination of the human ability, the capacity of the human mind, our place within the world, what it means to live and move and breathe and exist. That becomes the topic of Montaigne. He begins to explore deep down within himself. He then tries to make his own deductions and observations about life around him. You know, his essays often start with the phrase like on, so just it is about. On thumbs. He talks about thumbs. On eating. On all sorts of varied and things you might think are not important. But that's the point of the Renaissance. It had no limit on what it was fascinated with. And that's part of what you get from Montaigne. I'm not telling you what Montaigne will teach you. You must read it to find his way of thinking, and it will teach you something unique to yourself. I haven't told you in any of these books what the point of the Renaissance mind is that they bring out. You can't. It's spending time with these people through their works that you begin to become aware of a way of looking at things. One of those is that infinite curiosity. Montaigne, when you read his essays, will encourage you to step out in your garden and try to understand why you like being in your garden. You will look at clouds, and yes, we can see a cloud, but Montaigne would write about clouds so that you can, you know, how do they have an effect on us? What do I think makes them go up there? And he reads stuff and then muses on it himself, but he's coming to know his own experience of himself. It is really the almost the apex of Mirandola's The Dignity of Man. The person who never stops to look at the life around them and their thoughts on it and their interaction with it is just that beast scratching the central itch. But we can reach so much higher. We can reach to other worlds, to Nick Bruno's phrase in his book. And so Michel de Montaigne, you may have heard them before, you can get hold of them on an e-reader, quite cheap actually, and you can literally just randomly open a point and read. Pick any essay whatsoever and just look at it. And others actually do this as well. Bacon himself has his own essays, which is not Novum Organum, it's just Organum. It's just his work, his essays on life around him. He talks about, things like faith and things about foolishness of people. And again, friendship is another one he talks about. But Montaigne spent 20 years doing this, making a study of himself and his own thoughts. And it's quite revealing. It makes you want to write a little bit about your own thoughts and your own life. But again, what does it reveal about the mindset? This prevailing world spirit. Funnily enough, Bruno talks about a world soul, but this world spirit in the area of Europe in the Renaissance that gave birth to such a prolific output of genius. Because if we can tap into that, if that's what it produced, then if we can tap into it, what can we produce for ourselves? I'm not talking about being great, but just to get more zip out of life, as it were. So, I mentioned 2 other books. In my study and getting this list together and reading through various Renaissance things and researching Renaissance, 2 books struck me as potentially the apex. They are the 2 hemispheres of the Renaissance accomplishment in the humanities. And I'm not going to say what they are here, but that's a video which I hope to be bringing up soon. 2 works which may well be the apex of the Renaissance. And I'm going to try and make an argument that they've not been beaten since either, which shows just how powerful the Renaissance way of thinking is. And hence, is it a lesson for each of us to want to go back to some of its principal tenets? Excuse me. Anyway, if you're interested in that, hit like and subscribe. And if you could share this with anyone you think would be interested, please share this. Share this with the one person amongst your friends who you think would be most inclined to be interested in having a Renaissance mind. Until the next time, I wish you joy in whatever you read.